They lived like gods but died like beggars. The biggest stars of the 60s who sold millions of records ended up with nothing. One guitar legend worth $175 million today died with just $20,000 to his name. The founder of Rolling Stones drowned in debt while his bandmates got rich. The drummer who created the most famous beat in history died homeless on the streets. These rock legends filled stadiums but couldn't pay their bills. Their shocking stories will break your heart. Brian Jones had everything going for him in the early 1960s. He had talent, charisma, and a vision. He started the Rolling Stones in 1962, naming them after a Muddy Waters song, and brought together a group that would change music forever. He wasn't just another band member. He was the one who gave them their edge. While Mick Jagger and Keith Richards were still figuring things out, Brian was already shaping the sound, introducing slide guitar to British rock and giving the Stones their gritty blues tone. But the fame didn't come with fortune, not for him anyway. Behind the scenes, Brian's money problems kept getting worse. When he died in 1969 at just 27 years old, he was drowning in debt. Bill Wyman, the Stones' bassist, later said Brian owed around £30,000 at the time, which today would be over £550,000. It's shocking considering the band was already world famous, but Brian didn't get the same kind of money as Jagger and Richards. They wrote the songs, so they got the royalties. Brian didn't. Wyman said Brian earned just 1/10 of what the others made. It wasn't just about royalties. The tax system in Britain back then was brutal. Prime Minister Harold Wilson's government had raised the top tax rate to 93%, and it hit musicians hard. The Stones even had to leave England because of it. And if that wasn't enough, they didn't really have control over their own money. Their manager, Alan Klein, handled everything. If they needed cash, they had to ask him for it. That included Brian. Despite being a founding member, he had to beg for his own money. Then came the legal trouble. In 1968, Brian was busted for cannabis. He had to pay a fine of £50 and court costs of £105. That doesn't sound like much now, but back then it was enough to make a dent, especially when he was already in financial trouble. The arrest didn't help his image either. He was using drugs heavily, his health was fading, and his relationship with the band was falling apart. By the time the Stones kicked him out in June 1969, he was isolated, addicted, and broke. Even with all that, Brian made a strange move just a year before he died. He bought a massive countryside home, Cochford Farm in East Sussex. It used to belong to A. Milne, the man who created Winnie the Pooh. The place later sold for over £1.8 million, but Brian bought it while still in deep debt. He was already in trouble with British tax authorities, and that house only made things worse. On the night of July 2, 1969, Brian was found dead at the bottom of the swimming pool at Cochford Farm. It was just a few weeks after he left the band. The official report said he drowned, and the cause was ruled death by misadventure. But the story didn't end there. His daughter, Barbara Marion, who didn't even know Brian was her father until 2002, believes he was murdered. She says the investigation was sloppy and the truth never came out. The coroner did mention that Brian's liver and heart were both badly damaged from drug and alcohol abuse. After he died, his financial troubles didn't go away. His royalties went straight to paying off his tax debt. It took 13 years to clear it all. Only in 1982 did his parents, his legal heirs, finally start receiving what was left of his earnings. Jimi Hendrix. When Jimi Hendrix died on September 18, 1970, the world lost one of the greatest guitarists of all time. Fans were shocked by the news, but what they didn't know was just how broke he was. Despite playing sold-out shows that made around $50,000 per night, a massive amount back then, Jimi only had $20,000 in his bank account. He was drowning in debt. There were back taxes, unpaid bills, and money that seemed to vanish into thin air. It didn't make sense, a man that famous, that talented, with so little to his name. The money problems didn't start late in his career, they started early. In 1965, before anyone really knew who he was, Hendrix signed a recording contract for just $1. That's not a typo, $1 single. The man who offered it, Ed Chalpin, locked Jimi into a deal that would later cause endless legal battles. Years later, when Hendrix became a global superstar, that $1 contract came back to haunt him. Then came Michael Jeffrey. He became Jimi's manager, But he wasn't just a regular business guy. He had a shady past with rumored ties to intelligence agencies and even the mafia. Under Jeffrey's control, money started disappearing. Most of the band's earnings were funneled into offshore accounts that no one could trace. Hendrix was performing non-stop, making big money on paper, but he barely saw any of it. The constant touring crushed him. He needed rest. He needed time to write and recover. But Jeffrey didn't care. He kept pushing him from one city to the next. The pressure, the exhaustion, the drugs, it all added up. Jimmy started to break down. He tried to cut ties with Jeffrey, but between the lawsuits and tricky contracts, he was stuck. He couldn't escape. Some say the music industry didn't kill him in one night. It wore him down slowly, like a machine grinding him to death. Hendrix wasn't just fighting the industry. He was also battling his past. He grew up poor in Seattle, raised in a broken home. He faced racism, instability, and trauma from a young age. These experiences shaped him. He became quiet, easygoing, and often avoided conflict. That made him a perfect target for people who wanted to use him. He didn't know how to fight back, or maybe he didn't believe he could. Some experts call it learned helplessness, when someone stops trying because life has taught them that nothing they do will change things. When he died, Hendrix didn't leave a will. That caused even more chaos. His estate, worth somewhere between $66 and $80 million at the time, went to his father, Al Hendrix. But when Al passed away in 2002, he handed everything over to his adopted stepdaughter Janie, cutting out Jimmy's real brother Leon. That decision tore the family apart. Leon felt betrayed. He said Janie had manipulated their father. He took the fight to court but lost every time. Leon tried to make money through his own Hendrix projects, but the estate kept suing him for using the name. Under Janie's control, the Hendrix brand became big business. Experience Hendrix LLC now manages everything tied to Jimmy's name. The estate is worth over $175 million today. Just in 2024, it made more than $6.6 million. There are new albums, merchandise, documentaries, and licensing deals. Even Jimmy's guitar, the white Stratocaster he played at Woodstock, sold for $2 million in 2000 to Microsoft's Paul Allen. That guitar is likely worth even more now. Gregory Coleman was born in September 1944 and showed musical talent from an early age. He led the band as drum major at Armstrong High School in Richmond, Virginia, and graduated in 1962. Soon after, he formed a group called G.C. Coleman and the Soul Twisters. He played drums for major acts like the Marvelettes, Otis Redding, and Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions. His skills stood out, and eventually he joined a multiracial soul and funk group called the Winstons based in Washington, D.C. In 1969, the Winstons had a hit with a song called "Color Him Father." It climbed to number 7 on the Billboard Hot 100 and won a Grammy. But it was the B-side of that record, an instrumental called "Amen Brother," that would quietly change music history. About 1.5 minutes into the track, Gregory played a short 4-bar drum solo. It lasted just 7 seconds. He came up with it quickly during the recording session and likely had no idea what it would become. That 7-second break, later called the Amen break, didn't get much attention at first. But in 1986, it was included on a DJ compilation called Ultimate Breaks and Beats. From there, everything changed. DJs and producers loved the clean rhythm and punchy feel. It started showing up in early hip-hop like Salt-N-Pepa's I Desire and NWA's Straight Outta Compton. By the 1990s, the break was everywhere. It became the backbone of new genres like jungle, drum and bass, and breakcore. Producers chopped it up, sped it up, slowed it down, and built entire tracks around it. It shaped the sound of underground and mainstream music alike. But while others were getting rich, Gregory Coleman got nothing. No one paid him. He didn't receive a single royalty. The music industry's rules around sampling were vague, and by the time people realized how heavily the break had been used, it was too late to sue. The copyright laws only allowed a 3-year window to take legal action, and that window had closed long ago. After the Winstons broke up in 1970, Coleman moved to Atlanta. He played in local bands, including the Georgia Power Band, and recorded with groups like Brick. But his financial situation kept getting worse. While his drum beat was being used in thousands of songs, from commercials to club hits, he was struggling to survive. In 2006, he died homeless in Atlanta with no real understanding of how important his work had become. Years later, Richard Spencer, the band leader of the Winstons, spoke about what happened. He said Coleman had poured his soul into that drum break, and now people were copying it and making millions. In 2015, some British DJs started a fundraiser to thank the original creators. They raised £24,000, but Coleman was already gone by then. The money went to Spencer, not to Coleman's family. His grave remains unmarked. Janis Joplin didn't look like a rock star when she started. She was raw, loud, and full of soul. In 1966, she joined Big Brother and the Holding Company, a small psychedelic rock band from San Francisco. Before long, everything changed. A year later, she performed at the Monterey Pop Festival, a moment that would define her career. The audience had no idea who she was when she stepped on stage, but after her wild, explosive performance of Ball and Chain, she left as the queen of the festival. Even Cass Elliot from the Mamas and the Papas could be seen mouthing, "Wow, that's really heavy." Janis had arrived. Columbia Records took notice. Clive Davis, the president, signed her right after that performance. But before all that fame, she had already signed a bad deal with Mainstream Records in 1966. It sounded like a big step, but it wasn't. There was no advance payment. The band only got paid minimum wages for recording, and even that had to be paid back later. It was a trap, so they toured constantly to stay afloat. The pressure was non-stop, and Janis felt it. Their 1968 album Cheap Thrills exploded with hits like Piece of My Heart and Summertime. It went gold, but the process was messy. Tensions rose inside the band. Janis, always hungry for more creative freedom, decided to go solo. She formed the Cosmic Blues Band, which gave her control but also more responsibility. That meant more stress, more money problems, and more weight on her shoulders. Despite everything, she kept rising. She was featured on 60 Minutes, made the cover of Rolling Stone, and appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. But her private life was falling apart. Her drinking got worse. She loved Southern Comfort so much that the company actually sent her a lynx coat as thanks for the free promotion. But behind the funny stories was something darker. Janis had started using heroin, and it was taking over. In 1970, she was recording a new album, Pearl, with her latest band, Full Tilt Boogie. She seemed hopeful, but on October 4th, just months before the album's release, her road manager found her dead in a hotel room. She was 27. The coroner ruled it a heroin overdose, possibly mixed with alcohol. She died before she could see how big Pearl would become. At the time of her death, Janis had about $250,000 to her name, around $1.7 million today. Not bad, but nowhere near what her talent deserved. After she died, her album Pearl went on to sell millions. Her siblings inherited the rights to her music and image, and they've made far more money than Janis ever did. In 2015, her famous psychedelic Porsche sold for $1.76 million. Her name became a brand, and her legacy turned into business. Companies bought and sold her rights like property. Janis Joplin became worth more dead than she ever was alive. Skip Spence's story isn't just tragic, it's haunting. Born in Windsor, Canada in 1946, he didn't follow a typical path into music. He was a guitarist, but when Jefferson Airplane needed a drummer, they gave him the job even though he'd never touched a drum kit before. That didn't stop him. His talent was raw, natural, and magnetic. He played on their debut album and co-wrote a couple of tracks, but just months in, he vanished, either fired or simply walked away. Soon after, he saw Quicksilver Messenger Service perform live. That night lit something in him. He picked up his guitar again and helped form Moby Grape in 1966. The band exploded onto the San Francisco scene. Their harmonies, their three-guitar attack, it was electric. They were tight, fresh, and for a moment, it felt like they could be bigger than Jefferson Airplane or even the Grateful Dead. They played alongside legends like Janis Joplin, Hendrix, and Neil Young. But by 1968, things started to unravel. The band was in New York recording. The sessions were long, the hotel rooms were lonely. Skip was taking more and more LSD. Then one night, he disappeared with a woman the band later described as a black witch. When he came back, he wasn't the same. He believed he was the Antichrist. He took a fire axe and tried to break down his bandmate Don Stevenson's hotel door. He wasn't trying to hurt him, he thought he needed to kill him to save him. Skip was arrested and sent to Bellevue Hospital. Doctors diagnosed him with schizophrenia. For 6 months, they kept him locked up and filled him with heavy medication. But even in that darkness, something sparked. He wrote songs in the hospital, strange, beautiful, broken songs. When he got out, Columbia Records gave him a chance to record in a Nashville studio. Over just 9 days, he recorded every instrument and every word himself. The result was Or. It wasn't like anything else, but nobody bought it. It became the worst-selling album in Columbia's history and was pulled within a year. After that, Skip kept falling. He started using heroin and cocaine. At one point, he overdosed so badly they tagged his toe and placed him in a morgue, but then he sat up and asked for water. That really happened. He tried to play music again in a couple of bands during the 70s, but the spark never came back. For decades, he slipped through the cracks. He had no real home, no steady income, and relied on state care. He moved between shelters, hospitals, and low-rent rooms in places like Santa Cruz and San Jose. Moby Grape never turned their back on him. They gave him royalties, included his songs, and made sure he was okay when they could. In the 90s, he joined a music therapy program. Some of that old light flickered again. In 1996, he performed for the last time. It was in Santa Cruz. He led Moby Grape on stage, sang Sailing, and then played a song he'd written for Jefferson Airplane 30 years earlier. His old bandmate Peter Lewis used to visit him regularly. During those final years, Skip lived in a trailer in Capitola near the ocean. He wasn't angry or bitter, just quiet, just tired. Del Shannon was born Charles Whedon Westover on December 30, 1934. He grew up in Michigan and, like many kids of his time, he loved music. But what made him stand out was his high falsetto voice, which would one day echo on radios around the world. That moment came in 1961 when he released a song called Runaway. It wasn't just a hit, it exploded, with its catchy melody and strange new sound from an electric keyboard called the Musitron. Runaway shot to #1 and turned Shannon into an international star overnight. He followed it up with other hits like Keep Searching, Handyman, and Do You Want to Dance? For a while, it looked like he had it all. He had fans in the United States and even more in England. He drove luxury cars, rode a Honda Goldwing motorcycle, and bought a new Cadillac every 2 years. From the outside, it was the perfect rock star life. But behind the fame, things were falling apart. By 1963, Shannon was caught in a mess of bad management. He was earning money, but he wasn't seeing it. His royalties weren't being paid properly. Money was going places it shouldn't have, and not enough was ending up in his own pocket. What followed was a long legal battle that dragged on for over a decade. He didn't give up. He fought back by starting his own label, called Burley, hoping to escape his managers and take back control. It was a bold move, but it didn't go far. Only one song from the label, Sue's Gonna Be Mine, did well, and strangely, Shannon went back to working with the same people he'd tried to leave, signing new deals with EMI Records in the United States and stateside in the UK. As the British invasion took over the charts, solo acts like Shannon started fading. Bands like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones dominated the scene, and Shannon's fame slipped. He kept touring and recording through the 70s, especially in places like England and Australia, but the hits were gone. And with the career troubles came personal demons. He began drinking and relying on pills. The music that had once lifted him now left him feeling trapped. Eventually, he fought his way back from addiction. By the late 1970s, he was writing again and getting healthy. But the weight of everything he'd been through, bad business deals, fading fame, personal battles, never fully left him. In early 1990, he was working hard to finish a new album and plan a comeback tour. On January 24th, his doctor prescribed him Prozac for depression. 15 days later, Del Shannon was dead. He shot himself in the head with a .22 rifle in his home in Santa Clarita, California. He was 55. His wife, Leanne Westover, noticed something had changed after he started the medication. She said he suffered from sleepless nights, fatigue, a racing heart, and other troubling symptoms. She blamed the drug and filed a lawsuit against the makers of Prozac, saying they hadn't done enough to warn about its dangers. Her lawyer was blunt. He said Eli Lilly and Company was as responsible for Shannon's death as if they had pulled the trigger themselves. Despite the tragedy, Del Shannon's influence never faded. In 1999, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame followed in 2005. After his death, the Traveling Wilburys, a band with Tom Petty, Bob Dylan, George Harrison, and Jeff Lynne, recorded a version of Runaway in his memory. Arthur Lee was one of the most creative voices of the 1960s, but his story is also one of heartbreak. Born Arthur Taylor Porter in 1945 in Memphis, he later changed his name and became the frontman of a band called Love. He had big ideas and even bigger dreams, and for a while, it looked like he might change rock music forever. He formed Love in 1965 after hearing the Byrds and feeling something click. The band quickly made a name for themselves in Los Angeles. They were different, not just musically but visually too. They were one of the first racially mixed rock bands, and Arthur proudly called himself the first black hippie. They played the clubs on Sunset Strip and seemed on the edge of something big. Their second album, Da Capo, had a wild, aggressive song called 7 and 7 Is that sounded years ahead of its time. Some people even say it helped spark the beginning of punk rock. Then came Forever Changes in 1967. It was full of soft strings, haunting horns, and Arthur's cryptic, poetic lyrics. It didn't scream like other psychedelic albums. It whispered. It didn't climb the charts in America, though it reached only number 154. In the UK, it did a little better, but the damage was done. The album is now seen as one of the greatest ever, but back then, it barely made a ripple. Part of the problem was that Love kept saying no to big opportunities. They even turned down a slot at the Monterey Pop Festival, which could have launched them to a whole new level. Behind the scenes, things were falling apart. Drugs were everywhere. The band was fighting, and some members were hooked on heroin. Arthur watched as Elektra Records, the label he helped connect with the Doors, put all their focus into promoting Jim Morrison instead. After Love broke up, Arthur tried to go solo. He experimented with soul music, but it didn't work out. He started disappearing from the music world, and his name faded. Then, in 1996, his life took a dark turn. He was arrested for firing a gun, though he always said it wasn't him. A fan later confessed, and a gunpowder test came back negative for Arthur, but the court didn't care. California's three strikes law kicked in, and instead of a short sentence, he got 12 years in prison. He could have avoided all of it if he had just pleaded guilty. That would have meant only 9 months behind bars, but he went to trial, and it cost him nearly 6 years of his life. While he was locked up, he refused visitors, interviews, or any spotlight. 2 of his old bandmates died while he was in prison, ending any hope of a full reunion. In 2001, a federal court finally reversed the charge because the prosecutor had committed misconduct. Arthur was free again. By that time, something had shifted. Younger musicians had started rediscovering Forever Changes. People were calling him a genius. Tribute concerts were held. Artists like Robert Plant and Ryan Adams came to show their support. For a short while, it seemed like Arthur was finally getting the love and credit he always deserved. But his time was running out. In 2006, doctors found he had acute leukemia. He went through chemotherapy and became the first adult in Tennessee to get a stem cell transplant of its kind. People hoped he'd recover and return to music, but the treatments didn't work. Arthur died that August in a Memphis hospital, with his wife Diane beside him. Until the very end, he believed he'd make a comeback. He died thinking he'd be back on stage soon. He never got that chance, but his music, fragile, powerful, and ahead of its time, lives.